Start the recording. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining Bob Moore and I. We're left to our own selves. Buzz Richardson, Sam Gould, and Tyler Kroll all have other assignments. Bob is at home, and you can hear him writing on his desk very fervently. We'll be talking to you tonight about the translation process, but first let's go on to the intro. So our Salt Lake schedule starts this Sunday, June the 10th. We'll meet at the flagpole to hear the beautiful Mormon Tabernacle Choir sing, and then Sunday night we'll be at Mill Race Park for you in West Jordan, or Taylorsville, pardon me, which is 1150 West, 5400 South, and then we are also there each day from Monday and Tuesday from 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. at the Mill Race Park. So as I said, we'll talk a little bit about the witness process that's going on down in Brazil, and it's not unlike what we've heard from Oliver Cowdery in his writings, Joseph Smith, other church history documents. But we... I'm a little bit worried about levels. If anybody wanted to message me and tell me they can't hear me, that would be nice. So this is called the English Scribe Witness. By the way, Bob, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Excellent, excellent. So at 3 p.m. Brazilian time on May 25th, 2018, Mauricio Berger took Yoni Batista and myself into the back room of his apartment, where he does the work of translating the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon. In a corner of the room there is a small table with a desk on the end of the closet to the corner. He set up the area for him to translate and for me to write the words that he speaks. Mauricio sat at the desk, his back in the corner of the room. Joni and I sat at the table across from him. Mauricio had driven nails high up in the walls, one to his left and one to his right. He took a sheet with 2 strings attached to it and strung it around these nails. The end result created a little triangular space between the 2 walls and the sheet, where Mauricio sat at the desk. Yoni and I were on the outside of the sheet at the other end of the table. Right before we began, I looked in his little triangle, and there was nothing there except for the plates, the interpreters, which he has fastened into a frame, and a chair. I sat at a computer, and Yoni sat next to me. For this small portion, Mauricio just had me type. But later he said, I will need to write it out because there needs to be a physical copy of the translation. This first time for me was just a short passage, and we only did it in English, as the Portuguese part of the portion had already been completed. The 3 of us knelt on the floor, and Mauricio offered a prayer. We then took our seats, and the translation was commenced. Mauricio sounded out the words as best he could. Some of them I was able to understand, while many needed to be spelled out. Yoni sat next to me and watched, asking Mauricio questions of clarification when I couldn't make something out or thought a word didn't sound right. There were some times when Mauricio made a mistake, and he would reread the word until we could figure it out. The mistakes that were made were minor, such as accidentally replacing a letter A with a letter O. Oftentimes, in these moments of question, he would ask me to turn off the light as I was sitting next to the switch on the wall. He told me later that sometimes the artificial light reflecting off the plates would interfere with what he was seeing through the stones. The translation that I typed came out to 15 lines of text and 197 words. I asked Mauricio how much it was on the plates, and he put his fingers at the point where he started and where he ended. It was little more than half of one line of characters. He later counted 11 characters that had been translated in that session. He also later explained some about how the interpreters work. He sees a list of articles and other filler words for the English translation that he chooses from to put into the spot provided. I do not fully understand this, and I don't know if I ever will. But Mauricio said that when he read the English with me today, there were less options for him to choose from. He believes that since I was helping this time, he didn't need as much assistance from the interpreters as he does when he is alone. It was a marvelous experience to help with the translation. The Holy Spirit was present and gave me clarity of mind, which was needed to understand Mauricio's attempts at sounding out the English words, some of which were far from correct, and to suggest the necessary minor changes. I do testify that the translation was accomplished only by the divine power of God, who has brought forth this work in his own time and his own way. It is my understanding that I am supposed to be the English scribe for the complete length of the sealed portion, but I do not know if that is the Lord's plan. Neither do I know when it will be completed. Well, when I read that, I thought, this probably should be, even though it's on thecauseofzion.org, it's a little bit buried, and it's extraordinary, really. It reminds me of, I have a couple of questions, but it reminds me of the way computers work. Because when you're in context of something that you know is going on in the with the user, you can present information that is timely and relevant. In the case of the stones that Mauricio is using, it was very interesting to hear Kelvin talk about articles, which are articles of speech, like the, a, that, was, and so on, to provide context and clarity to a translation when you're writing something. And then when Kelvin was present, the difference was that Mauricio didn't need as much help. What about you, Bob? Have you thought through that a little bit after you read that, or have you even read it?
I read that when he first sent that. Well, we were there in March. Mauricio spent a little time to explain how the stones work, what he sees through the stones, and he's very good at being able to demonstrate a thought. Not just that, but other things. So what he said is that when he looks through the stone, the molten stone, he puts over his right eye, and the left eye is the quartz stone, and that blinds the left eye. And then he can see through the right eye the character. So in the center of his view is the character. And then if you could consider miniature little TV screens, not as the ratio would probably be like a 16:5 or something. It'd be more like a movie screen in that it's narrow. You could consider 6 of those around that, forming like a hexagon at each of the points. And he said that the screens alter. Let's say the top one would be Portuguese. The next one on the left would be English. The one below it would be Portuguese. The one at the bottom, English, and all the way around. So he has 3 English, 3 Portuguese. When he looks at the individual screen, he sees a few words or a phrase. And so he can look at three of those screens and see a group of words, and his knowledge of the language then allows him to put that into a sensible phrase the way he would speak it. And that's how he translates that character. In the English, it's the same thing, but he doesn't understand English. So being able to actually choose the right words, put them in the right order so that he makes a comprehensible phrase is much more difficult. So he translated the English and sent it to us. It was a very small portion, maybe 6 lines. And he asked us how well that made sense. It made sense. We could understand what he said, but there were just words out of place. I think there were about 3 or 4 words that were the wrong tense or out of order. There's a word context, and I've noticed in writing him and going through Google Translate, he will write something and it translates context quite a bit. And that doesn't make sense. For instance, I think the phrase says it says in the context of these words, and it made more sense to me out of the context of the whole little part that he was writing there. It would have been better to say the revelation of these words. I'm not sure that's accurate, but that's how I took the word context. It didn't make sense because it wasn't in the context of the situation. It was more abstract than that. And so we made a comment. All of us kind of made a little comment, and I think he was a little discouraged that he hadn't been as clear as he had hoped. So now with Kelvin there, I can understand how he can help him and why he really needs to see less words in order to be able to get the English stated.
Yeah, that makes sense, to have an English somebody there to hear context, but not to change content.
That's right. It's a matter of getting the tense of the word right or the order of the words as they are. In other words, each character is a phrase. And so when he gives the phrase, it's just a little different order of words, and that's why sometimes it just seems a little awkward.
Well, the definition or the correct me, but I don't think we've heard as much clarity about the translation process over our history, our entire history, compared to this, because things are more open and forthright than they ever were with Joseph Smith and Oliver. Is that kind of how you're getting it?
I don't know that we're more forthright. I think that those people already were understood, maybe like Kelvin and Johnny understand. They're right there. But the method of communication and writing was so much more difficult in those days, and the access to it was so slow. And because we live in this information age, we just have it. We're just more. It's more readily available to us.
So it doesn't seem out of place to you at all. And the question I had when I was with you January 27th on that Saturday at the Zarahemla branch, when they brought their pots and their dishes and their desserts and their beverages. That was fun.
Yeah.
You were showing me photos of the plates, and I couldn't believe it. But there was a purpose for that, I presume. And we're in an age of you can have photos, and there has been a lot of photos taken. Can you comment on that generally?
When we were first there, we were allowed to, when I say we, I mean Joseph F. Smith and myself were allowed to take pictures at a distance of the plates. And I took a picture of Joseph, 3 of them, with him holding the plates, sitting down, and then I stood up and held him with him, and they took my phone and took a picture of it. That's all the pictures that I personally took. Joseph didn't have any capability of taking pictures. When we were there the second time and examined the plates, and some of them had magnifying glasses and jeweler's glasses, and I mean they examined the interpreter stone and the plates. We took pictures of that. I have a little short video when they unsealed that and turned the first page, and you can hear the gasp in the room as they uncovered the sealed portion. It's now, brighter plates and a little different, rougher.
We heard about that last night.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you could, don't lose your thread there, but could you give us a little more detail of when and why the sealed portion was open?
I had some inkling from Mauricio that he had been given permission to open the sealed portion when the witnesses were there. So when the witnesses were selected, I was kind of the logistics person. So once we had the 6 individuals identified, my job was to, how are we going to go? When are we going to go? And that became an issue. And we decided, Joseph and I did, that Joseph could go down one weekend, I could go down the next weekend, and that way we could get everybody there in 2 separate weekends. And we pulled 6, and their schedules were such that they all wanted to go the same weekend. And so we did. And Mauricio's apartment was very small. We were wall-to-wall people. We just laid mattresses on the floor in the different rooms. Joseph, they respect Joseph. They're very loving and respectful people. I don't know that they could understand our more adversarial society. But at any rate, Joseph had his own room. It was a small bedroom with a single bed in it, and the rest of us just laid around on mattresses throughout the apartment in different rooms, and that's how we slept. And I thought that was remarkable, so we were all there. And Mauricio had indicated that Moroni had given him permission to unseal the sealed portion while we were there. I got an email from Mauricio on the 16th of February, and he said that he had left the plates out of their container. I assume that was in a room, one of the bedrooms. There aren't any closets like we have closets. I don't know whether they were on the floor. They do have maybe a little dresser or a compartment where they put clothes. But at any rate, he'd left them out and standing on edge. So they weren't laying like on a book like you'd lay it on your desk, but more like on a library shelf. And they were laying on edge. And when he came back to them, the sealed plates had expanded. And he took a picture and sent it to us. And what you could see by looking at the edge, before they'd been tightly bound, you could just see that they were individual plates bound by these 2 pins. And what had happened was that they had stretched, and you could now see that the sealed portion was in 2 parts. Well, what that meant was that they could now lay it down flat with the back of the sealed book on the bottom. They could press on the top of the sealed portion, and by doing that, the little braided pins, they actually could expose the head. It wasn't embedded in the page, and they then took pliers and pried it up and then clipped off those little tops, and therefore they could just lift the plate right over the top of that pen.
So we don't know if Joseph ever saw the braided connector.
I think he did, and the reason that I think he did, which to me is very interesting, I think he took the bands off. And the reason that I say that is because Joseph made a copy of the characters, gave them to Martin Harris. Every believer of the Book of Mormon is familiar with that story. The question is what did he copy? And where are those characters? And what was the sheet? The Whitmer transcript that was David Whitmer had, he claimed was the original one, but we no longer believe that. We think that was written by, and actually it was LDS BYU studies, handwriting analysis. They concluded that John Whitmer actually made that copy. And so David thought, or at least said, that was the original. But the one that Professor Anton saw, he described it, and it was entirely different than the copy that David Whitmer had. Now we know that there's several other copies that existed during the life of Joseph. I think there's 3. And their characters are a bit different. And then you have Professor Anton's testimony. You have Lucy Mack, who claimed that Mrs. Harris had a copy. And so we have a number of copies that were made. And it's my opinion that what Joseph did was make the original copy off the back plate of the sealed portion. And to do that, he would have had to take the bands off.
Really?
Yeah, because he wouldn't have been able to see them all.
Which just fans, I mean, just think about why, I mean, where he did that, when he did that, and this crazy controversy, tempest in a teapot, debunking campaign going on from folks on your side of the woods, and, you know, calling it a Hoffman fraud and so on. Wow. How interesting.
Yeah, that is just a fascinating thing to me, because obviously the description that Professor Anton gives matches what we saw on the back page. It does have a circle. I called it a seal. But when you look at the Hoffman transcript and you actually look at the back page, they're similar, but the characters are very different.
Really?
And they're not really exact. There's some that are very, very close. So we have a member that goes to our little branch who analyzed them. He does not have a copy of the whole back page, but he has a small copy that Mauricio sent to an inquirer who happened to be in the enemy camp. Mauricio didn't know. And so that person took the small little picture and mapped it onto Hoffman, and then claimed that the whole Hoffman transcript was a copy. Well, he took that little section and then compared it to all the known transcripts, including Hoffman's. And he took Hoffman's testimony about what Hoffman did, and he showed that Hoffman was right. He added flares, trying to make them look different, but supposedly more ancient. And he has I don't know whether that paper's online or not. If it is going to be online, it'll be on secondinvitation.org. I suppose that's where it'll initially be given. But it's really interesting to see what Hoffman added to the characters, how the characters are different, and how they are different from the back plate. So their Hoffman transcript is different than the back plate, but it's more similar than to the description that Professor Anton gave. So the question is, where did Hoffman come up with the idea? And I was, being a member of the Reorganized Church, the Reorganized Church got excited when Hoffman produced supposedly a valid copy of Joseph Smith III's blessing by his father, or designation to be his successor in the red brick store.
So you guys got duped too.
Yeah, they got duped. They bought that. I was pastor of a congregation, a branch of the church. They gave every pastor a specially engraved copy of that. I still have it on my library shelf. And they wanted. We had a general conference where there was a motion to put it in our Doctrine and Covenants. So that's what happened. Well, when he got discovered, that our church leaders quoted, and I'm not sure who they quoted. I'd have to go back and read. I don't even know if it's in the Herald or where it was, but they quoted a person on the investigator team who said that he thought the goal of Hoffman was to produce the lost 116 pages.
Sure it was.
Well, the problem is that if Mrs. Harris had a copy of the back plate, and she also, I believe, stole the 116 pages. That's certainly what Lucy has to say.
Yeah.
If those survived, let's say among the some group in, I'm thinking of the Mason Lodge in Rochester, where there was a hotbed. Hoffman was tied up with some ex-LDS people, anti-LDS people. Could he have actually been involved in trying to disprove Mormonism by producing both sets of the 116 pages and the changed 116 pages?
Why not?
And so to me, that's the interesting story here. And the fact that they matched the back plate of the plates in Mauricio's possession is really big confirmation to me that he has the original plates. None of the other plates that we saw look anything like the back plate. We haven't looked inside the sealed book. We can't.
You know, the enemy camp, as you called it, which is just a nice way of saying those that are in opposition, they are going to be just as egg on their face as they think that those that expect it to be real are going to have. You know, they expect me to have egg on my face, which is not going to be as true with them as egg on their face when this thing happens. So anyway, just a little pre-victory dance here, because it's the Hoffman nonsense that keeps swirling around on this. It's all over this thread and within hundreds of comments. So I don't know if you got more to say on that, but it is fascinating what you're talking about.
Well, they've taken a picture. They have a picture, and I didn't count, but let's say they have 15 characters. And they're arranged in vertical columns except for the seal, or what Professor Anthony called the Mexican calendar. However, all the other plates that we saw, 66 that comprise the original Book of Mormon, not the small plates, but the original Book of Mormon, and then the 42 that are the greater teachings that Moroni spoke of, that are there at the beginning. That's 108, and none of those look like Hoffman transcript. So to say that you have 108 plates inscribed on both sides that were copied from Hoffman's transcript, that's actually more of a fantasy than anything, because they don't even look alike, although some characters are the same.
Right. You know, I don't. It would be very difficult for a fabricator to make all this stuff up. I mean, it's a lot easier to assume that it's the Hoffman fraud coming through. You go and read some debunking paper. You know, I know there's one from an organization you were with, starting with a J, and
J, yeah.
And there's one from a publishing company starting with a P, And it's just, I mean, most people just want to believe this is baloney. It's safer to believe it's baloney. That way we can just move on with our comfortable lives.
Well, Jonathan, I think there's more to that than just the fact that it gives us an opportunity to ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
There is a basic premise here that is a bit insulting to all of us. What this says is, as it was told us, Joseph and I, when we were with him in October, and this was, according to them, the statement of Moroni, that the Lord has looked and found no one in latter-day Israel pure enough, and by that I mean uncontaminated with the sectarianism that exists in the Restoration. He found no one pure enough that he could use to speak his warning voice to latter-day Israel. Now,
that
that's
includes me, doesn't it?
Yeah, it includes me. And I like to think that I'm free from it, but I'm not. I know that. None of us were in a position that the Lord could use.
Right.
So if you have a position somewhere, or you've claimed a position, you're keeping the saints safe, or you have a position in an organization, that says something about you. And as a result, it's very easy for people to want to dismiss this, because they can also then dismiss that testimony.
That's the pure in heart. Did you say pure in heart, or what was your phraseology?
Well, the statement was pure enough, and then there was another statement, but it did say pure of heart.
Pure of heart.
And a pure of heart was a person who was uncontaminated with the traditions of men.
Now, Tuesday, up till Tuesday, we were on our 4th episode or something like that. On Sunday or Saturday night, one of those, I produced a little video with Joseph speaking in front of the Emma movie, and
I saw that.
Showed
it to my wife.
You showed it to your wife. And it was kind of like lighting the fuse on a bomb and running, because I was afraid in my heart of what people around me would say. And because as soon as I let that out, I knew it would be important, because I felt the spirit of it. Sure enough, an old friend of mine contacted me, and it was, "What are you doing? Have you left the church? Don't you know it's true?" And blah, blah, blah. And it was very scary. It was, "What are you doing, Jonathan?" I said to myself. And the next day I tried to be neutral and very clever. And and then Sam just, Sam and Eugene just said, "Well, maybe you're being dishonest." They didn't say it so directly, but maybe you're just lying to yourself and everybody. And why don't you just tell the truth? So the next day I decided to tell the truth on a post, that I fully expect this to be true. And if it's not, I'll be, I imply that I'll be very surprised. Now, the effect of that on my darkened heart was freedom. It was instant freedom. It was, I lost the spirits, the familiar spirits that plagued me, and I had rest, and it was beautiful. And I thought, when I see Joseph at the end of the week, I'm going to give him a big hug, and I'm going to say, "I know who you are." And as soon as I thought that, I produced the vision in my mind, and I felt the Spirit again. Now, it wasn't, 3 hours later I had the demons back. But as Sam and Eugene came back on that night, the peace returned. And then I got a phone call from a very important person, which confirmed a few things for me. But I think that's what this pure of heart thing is, and the traditions, because we're weighed down by our birth and our heritage and our inheritance, which was a blessing. You were born in the reorganization, and I was born in the gospel. We just have different ways of saying it, but it has the same implication, doesn't it, on
Yes.
our context. Go ahead. I don't know what you'd further say, but that's on to that. You know, there wasn't anybody pure in heart enough, including you, Jonathan, who I couldn't even use. Well, I don't, I'm a nobody, but Mauricio is even a bigger nobody, and look what he's doing. So there you go.
And he's not. His job is not to interface. His comment is that he can see as a seer. He can see things in general, but not in specific, and has no authority to bring revelation to latter-day Israel.
Yeah.
All he can do is translate the book. I don't know whether he has any prophetic role in that arena down there as that develops. I have no idea about that. But we've had a couple of times where we've wanted clarification. When I say we, I mean the witnesses. And we've asked for it. And he's fasted and prayed, and what he gives us is cryptic. It's a question and then a scripture that answers the question. And so it requires some insight from the Holy Spirit, the same insight that directed him. So he's not in a position where he's trying to give any kind of answer to anyone here in America. And he doesn't view that as his job.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting too, isn't it? Because we've got traditions that give us a prophet named Joseph Smith Jr. I don't know about being born in the reorganization, but being born in the gospel, it blessed us with prophet, seer, and revelator that we're now saying in my day, and it's a beautifully structured church. It really is. It has a lot of symmetry to it. It has a lot of sense. The youngest primary child can recite the organization of the gospel, and these interlopers like Mauricio and Joseph Frederick Smith. It just doesn't make sense to us. I don't know. How about from Missouri side of the camp?
Well, from the reorganization side, which is all broken up, the reorganization staked itself on the fact that the presidency belonged to the sons of Joseph III. I mean, Joseph the Jr.
Right.
And that he designated Joseph III, and Joseph III came and became the successor to Joseph. So the presidency existed. He restructured the quorums, and so the hierarchy existed in the Reorganized Church as it does in the LDS Church. So in the Reorganized Church, you had that same sense of belonging and fitting into this structure. The real problem came in the fact that beginning with Fred M., after Joseph III, Fred M. Was a little arrogant and a little heavy-handed. He ran into trouble. Church began to break apart. Israel was a kind man, and he was old when he took over and really brought calm back in the reorganization. And that's when I'm born. So that's my youth, is when
Israel was a great guy.
Yeah, it was a calm place, and he
Ours
didn't
was
ruffle.
David O. McKay, and
Really?
he was a beautiful, beautiful man with beautiful white hair. And, we speak in very calm tones within our presidency, and it's wonderful. It's a family.
Yeah, that's how we were, very close knit. Anywhere you went in our church, just like the LDS, your family.
Yeah.
You're a stranger, but you walk into a church. Where do you go to church? You tell them, and then who do you know that they know? And
yes,
and
it's easy.
You're all the same.
Yeah, you're within one person of knowing everybody, right?
Yep, that's correct. But then the church began to be broken apart in the 1960s. That's when I'm getting out of college. I graduate from college in 68. And the church begins this war that went into every congregation. You had to take sides.
Wow.
And eventually it was over whether or not you were going to take an academic liberal view of the scriptures, that they are mythological writings that may be inspired.
Yeah, we would say you rejected the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
That's how we would have described you, right?
Well, we describe that, but the people that we call restorationists, that's the kind of the camp that I'm in, that's how we viewed that. But that side, the leadership side, said, no, we embrace the Book of Mormon. We think it was inspired. We just don't think they're the literal words of God.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't make sense to me, but it sure did to them.
Yeah.
And so now, on the restoration side, we're without any prophet. We're without any structure.
Well, you
and
do
so
have
it's
a
free
prophet,
for all.
Don't you?
No, we do not. Well, now you'll find some people who say, well, Wallace Smith is still alive. He was the last one to hold that office. He still retains that power. If he repents, God could use him.
I can't remember the Community of Christ president, but you don't regard him as a prophet?
No, that's Steve Vesey, and we do not.
Very interesting.
No.
So we would cackle from the mountains here. We'd say, ha, ha, ha. See?
Yeah, you would. And you would be within your rights, I think, if I...
Yeah, I mean, look at our church versus, yours. We've got fruit here, we will say, and we've got mighty structure and mighty blessings that bless the entire earth.
You do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, that's true.
So, I mean, that must be kind of irritating to all y'all.
No, I'll give you an example. In 1984, when the real earthquake hit the RLDS Church, the area that in the domestic field that had the highest baptismal rate was Independence, Missouri, because people had left the RLDS Church and joined the LDS Church. So the Independent Stake High President was an elder in the RLDS Church in 1984, and he left and joined the LDS Church. The LDS stake president north of the river, where the temple is in Missouri, he was my son's best friend. He almost grew up in our house, and he left the church, the RLDS Church, and joined the LDS Church when he was a sophomore in college. Then went out to BYU and went on his mission, married an LDS lady, and we're still friends. I visit with him. I haven't gone up and talked to him about the plates, but I intend to do that.
Wow.
I don't want to put him in a bad spot, and I really don't. And that's my fear.
Well, this, when we discover this is true, which I expect, because I'll be able to hear the voice of the Lord through the servant Mauricio, and I don't care how it's phrased a little differently than our current Book of Mormon. It's going to be, but I'm still going to be able to see the structures of the Hebrew. I'm still going to be able to hear the voice. So when that happens, there's going to be so many people that will now question our traditions. And so I think, maybe that's the time, who knows, when we can share this with our friends, at least our testimony of it. Right now, there's not many takers.
Let me ask you a question. Why do you suppose that this is going to be available to just anyone?
Oh, I didn't know. Because the Book of Mormon is? Was that a good answer?
Yeah, I mean, that's the assumption that we make. You publish a book. How are you going to selectively decide who obtains a copy?
Yeah.
If you say it's secret, then somebody is going to deliberately.
They're gonna make it a fraud. They're gonna. Yeah. Anyway,
there'll be some way to steal a copy and print it.
And,
but Mormon says, and I'm sorry, I'm not versed in the LDS, so I can't tell you the chapter and verse. I can in the RLDS.
Yeah.
But Moroni towards the end, makes the statement that the greater things that Jesus taught are reserved for those who believe and accept the Book of Mormon. Now, if Mauricio is translating that, he wrote me and said 3 places in what he has translated make that same statement.
Ooh.
So, how are you going to prevent or exclude? And to me, the answer comes in the fact that there must be some purification in the land of Zion. So Joseph, when he's out there, he may allude to it. He'll quote the 4th chapter of Isaiah, beginning with the 2nd verse in the King James. And the first verse in the Joseph Smith translation of chapter 4 is the last verse in chapter 3. So but it talks about how there'll be a spirit of judgment and burning in both Jerusalem and Zion, and those left will be pure. And so it appears to me that the underlying prophecy that's attached to the announcement that the book is being translated is before it is received by Joseph to be published, that there will be a purging, so that those gathering to build the holy city, because that's the purpose of the book, to show them how to build it in righteousness. It'll only be the pure that are gathering there. The rest will be fleeing and going elsewhere. It's kind of like Noah out there building the ark. The underlying prophecy is that there is a judgment coming on the non-believer. And before that happened, you didn't know what it was or how it was going to come. And you could scoff at such a silly activity. In hindsight, we see that was the only way of salvation.
So you're saying that Isaiah 4, now it's interesting that our Joseph Smith translation does not have that distinction, maybe?
It's just moving one verse. So if you've got the King James, you just start at verse 2 and go to the end. It's a short chapter.
Well, in that day shall the branch of the Lord be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the earth shall be excellent and comely to them that are escaped of Israel. Is that the one?
Yep.
And it shall come to pass, they that are left in Zion, and he that remaineth in Jerusalem, shall be called holy, even everyone that is written among the living in Jerusalem. When the Lord shall have washed away the filth of the daughters of Zion, and shall have purged the blood of Jerusalem from the midst thereof, by the spirit of judgment and by the spirit of burning. And the Lord will create upon every dwelling place of Mount Zion, and upon her assemblies, a cloud and smoke by day, and the shining of a flaming fire by night. For upon all the glory of Zion shall be a defense, and there shall be a tabernacle for a shadow in the day time, for the heat, and for a place of refuge, and for a covert from the storm and from the rain. Correct. It is just one verse difference, and we don't, that I know of, make that distinction. Maybe we do.
It's not very important, because Joseph just put it at the end of the 3rd chapter. So
but
if you're reading
contextualizes that other verse better, I think.
It does. And in the 3rd chapter, it talks about the wantonness of the daughters of Zion, how they're going about in all their fine jewelry and all dressed up. And that's where we are today as Latter-day Saints, speaking generally, not specifically, and across all the full
We're not
spectrum.
Condemning anyone. We're not condemning any leader. Oh, God, goodness sakes, no.
But we have a tendency to be caught up in the worldliness that's about us. And that's all going to be taken away. So you read in the 13th chapter of Matthew, where Jesus is talking about the kingdom of heaven, and in 2 different places, he says he'll send the angels to take the wicked out of his kingdom and cast them out. So we're
that's 1,000 years from now, right? We're not close, so.
Well, if it takes Mauricio 1,000 years to translate it, then we are 1,000 years away.
Uh-oh. So the translation is moving along, I take it. So it's not a retirement plan to wait for him to fail. So, okay.
I don't know how long it's going to take him, but I think he will translate that, and it may take him till September. It may take him till next January, but I think it's a short period of time.
And he is doing two languages at once. We got to give him some slack.
Which I think is a remarkable process, because Kelvin doesn't know Portuguese, and Johnny and Mauricio do not know English. And so they're not running one through a translator to try to get the other.
It's not Google Translate going on.
That's right. And I think that's incredible. I can't speak two languages. I can hardly do one. But I think that if I could do Portuguese, I'd just be fascinated at trying to read the two translations and compare them.
Portuguese is gorgeous language. It sounds a little like French and a little like Spanish, and completely incomprehensible to me.
Yeah, that's how I am. Yeah, I know what ciao means.
It makes you wonder. Well, it doesn't make really. I'm just jesting a little bit, but maybe if we'd send a Japanese translator over and a Chinese, could get it all done at once. But then it would never come out, would it?
Probably wouldn't.
Two is enough.
The purpose of that book is twofold. The English is to teach the people in the land of Zion how to build it. We're going to build up the waste places of Zion. That's what the Latter-day Revelation says. So when this event, I'm just going to use that, maybe you could call it an event horizon if you take a physics view. When this event happens here in America, it'll precipitate the Great War.
Mm.
But
wait a minute. What Great War? You mean the disaster?
Yeah, the Armageddon War.
Okay. And is there, when you go to that, is that your understanding from being born in the reorganization, or is that a lately statement from Moroni?
That has nothing to do with Moroni. Moroni did teach. He quoted, according to Mauricio, he quoted out of the 5th chapter of Micah. He quoted the first verse, which was gathering troops. The second verse has to do with Jesus being born in Bethlehem. But the 5th verse has the fact that Jesus would stand when the Assyrians come into the land, along with 7 shepherds and 8 principal men.
Uh-oh.
And
so that's Micah 5.
About to be fulfilled, yes.
And so Micah 5 is imminent.
That's my understanding.
Sounds like 8 principal men or 8 witnesses to me, but keep going.
That's exactly what Mauricio told us.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of easy to extrapolate. Now, you got 7 shepherds out there that stand against the Assyrian. That means you've got to have that Elijah, Enoch kind of priesthood, with the force and the shield and so on that protect Zion. That priesthood has to be here right now then.
Well, I think that's something implied in all of that.
Sure it is. And, you've got the prophecies of the one mighty and strong. You have the Davidic servant. You have, and so on, which come
now
to
from
mind.
From the reorganization perspective, and this is interesting. This has died out in my generation, but when I was young, the one mighty and strong was Joseph Smith III.
Right.
That was the belief of the church. But that's kind of died out.
There's been hundreds of counterfeits that have been along in our church, and our church has to deal with so many different people that come forward and say, "I'm the one mighty and strong. Listen to me, follow me." And
we didn't have that until after '84, and then we've had our share.
Because you had it fulfilled in Joseph Smith III. I mean, we tried in. I know one of the prophets of our of the gospel said it was fulfilled in Edward Partridge. I mean, yeah, because Edward Partridge is mentioned in the beginning of the section, and so okay, so it was Edward Partridge, and then they tried to move on, but nobody's let them off the mat on that one, and they're extra irritated when people come along to claim it, and there are contemporary right now people claiming it. So, and it's, to me, it's baloney. I don't think we've seen that person yet. So.
I'm going to go back to the Assyrian, and I believe, and this was actually taught in the reorganization, but it wasn't officially taught. We had a president of 70. The 70 did a lot of teaching of the gospel in the RLDS Church, and the apostles, when they broke and became liberal in their academic views, the 70 kept teaching the gospel. They were teachers of the gospel, and this president of 70 was asked to write. We would often use Daniel. We would often use the Book of Revelations to show the course of the kingdom of God, how the church came out in 1830 and so forth. He wrote a book, and I knew him, and he told me personally, and he may even state that in the book, that we were just entering the pouring out of the sixth vial. And in the sixth vial, if you read that, I think it's Revelation 16:14, it's poured out upon the river Euphrates. Well, that's always the Assyrians crossed the river Euphrates to attack Israel. Mm-hmm. And he said that's going to be dried up. Mm-hmm. He didn't think that it would be the Arabs that would become this great power to threaten the United States. He thought it might be China, but it's turned out to be the Arabs. Mm-hmm. And the three frogs we can identify, one is socialism, and the other is the more academic, higher criticism, and the false prophet, that's Muhammad, and Islamism. Well, they have come out, and they're now challenging, they've overtaken Europe. I just found out this last weekend that the number one male name in London, England, is Muhammad. Mm-hmm. Newborn name.
Joseph.
Yeah. So you can see the influence, and that's coming here. Mm-hmm. And so when you get to the end of those, they're preparing for this great battle, or it says that blessed is he that waiteth, or to him that cometh. I can't quote it, but it talks about the coming of the thief in the night, a reference to Jesus coming as a thief in the night before the battle of Armageddon. And he's going to come and stand to save the United States for the purpose of being the place where the Lord builds the holy tabernacle for King David that he promised in 2 Samuel chapter 7.
Yeah, I've heard that quoted 11. Lately. Eugene brings that up a lot.
And Joseph likes to quote it. He's the one who talked to me. And that holy tabernacle is a body of believers filled with the Holy Ghost that are temples of God that are fitly framed together into a spiritual house. Both Peter and Paul teach that. That's the holy city, and so that's the holy city that Jesus is going to defend, and it'll eventually stretch from sea to shining sea. It'll gather all those who believe in Jesus and convert them into into images of Jesus through the gospel principles.
Wow. Well, we're coming up on the top of the hour. Can you believe it was an hour that you spoke?
Well, I apologize for dominating the conversation.
No, that was the plan, everyone. Was for Bob to do that. I'm going to go ahead and bump out with good old Joseph Smith, who you'll see again in his personality is pretty much without guile. I really like his humility, so I'm going to go ahead and play this, and then you can go ahead and hang up, Bob. and I'll call you back
Okay.
later. All right.
Thank you. It's nice talking to you again.
Thank you, Bob.
And I had a list of names that we had gathered, of ones that we thought would be good. But the thing that puzzled me is, I thought about some of these older brethren in the priesthood. They would be good, but what about some of these young people too? And I've done a little talking with the Lord, and I went down and I picked out 3 young people and 3 older people. I'm not going to say old because then I get in trouble here. Older people, I'll put it that way. One of the older people that I chose didn't want to go, so I had to get an alternate. I want to testify to you this afternoon, that I'm really proud of all these boys and these men that went down. We ended up with 3 older people and 4 younger, no, 2 older people and 4 younger people. And I'm proud of these young ones. They'd really done good. Some of them went down there with a little bit of skepticism. But once they got in where the plates were, that disappeared pretty fast.